real quick. All right.
And then do not disturb from. Oh, my time's
All right.
pretty good right now. So, all right, cool.
Let's do it.
All right, John. So, okay, hold on. Mentioned being. Okay, cool. Welcome to the Coaching Collective podcast. Today we have with us Luke Miller. So, Luke, we've had on the podcast before. Obviously, owner of No Switch Fitness, as well as would say collaborator with J3U.
Yeah, so I'm heavily involved as far as like the leadership in that as well. So J3 University, and then also we actually have J3 coaching coming in January. So that is kind of in the works. So those are the three businesses that I am running at the moment. So yeah, it's a lot, but I love it, man. This stuff makes the hair on my arms stand up. Like it's this is my life. So I really enjoy it.
Been hard to manage everything with the little one as well.
I don't know if I'd say hard. My wife's a rock star. She is a pediatric nurse practitioner, so she is a provider in the pediatric space as well. So she handles it really well, and she kind of is able to educate me along the way and what needs to happen. And so I just listen to her and do what's needed, and it's been a little easy to manage. The sleep part's been the tough part because some of my work schedules shifted to like 9 p.m. to midnight, and then I'm up at 5, so it's like 5 hours sleep some nights, but it's okay. It's all good fun.
And how's the transition been from out of bodybuilding as well?
It's been a tough one. So like not having that pursuit of competing has been weird. Especially just like, I mean, I feel great, like I can breathe again. So like when I quit, I was like 260, just shy of 260, I think 258. And so now I'm walking around like 225, maybe 230, somewhere around here. And it's good on the day to day, but it's hard because gym training is like almost not enjoyable at this point.
Yeah.
Because I just don't have the leverage points, man. Like to a point on the Atlantis pendulum where my work set was like 7.25 on that pendulum.
Yeah.
Like I don't even have enough weight to brace that right now, let alone try to squat it up and down for reps. So training has been a lot on the back burner, but I still do it and enjoy it. It's just different now.
Are you're still on TRT, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so clinical TRT, which for me sits around 100 to 120 milligrams per week. So yeah, that's the replacement therapy that I use, which keeps me in a fairly good spot. It keeps me like 800, 900. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, because obviously that's sort of leads into what was next. So before we actually go on to everything, I know I've done this before, man, and obviously I'm well aware of it too. So anyone who's not aware, I'm actually under the guise of Luke now as well. Been about just under 2 months.
Yeah, just under.
Yeah. So it's been good so far. I'm really happy with it actually. So and looking forward to like hopefully a long future as well. Which yeah.
Oh yeah, man. You're a great client. You're a killer client, and that's like you take care of the details well, which allows me to do my job. So that's the big thing.
Yeah, the best thing for me has been I got that itch again to go. So that's been fun. Like a new thing for me as well. Like I'm obviously on holidays at the moment, and I've not missed a beat. So that's like unheard of, and that to me is like I'm on. Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah,
that's when you're like clicking on all cylinders, and you've got to roll in, and everything is moving in the direction, right?
Yeah,
I'm excited for it. It's gonna be cool.
Me too. So yeah, give I guess the listeners a little bit of a context of I guess don't have to go too far into it, but some of your details and sort of what makes you, I guess, an expert in this field, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so dual degrees. So I have a undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. Most of my research was in the biomedical space, so I did like orthotic prosthetic design, helmet impacts, things like that. Grad school for me was master's in exercise science and physiology at the University of South Florida, where I was in the physique enhancement lab with Dr. Bill Campbell. I started my coaching business, No Switch Fitness, in 2016. So I've been coaching since 2016. Pretty much always been specifically in the bodybuilding space. It was weird for me. So like early on, I still got competitor-based inquiries, just like in my local town that I was in. But they were just like first timers and things like that. And so I've pretty much been coaching bodybuilding since 2016. I didn't really have that gym pop first and then, into it. I was kind of doing both at the same time. And that just developed into like, genetically, I was not the most gifted bodybuilder. And so when you're not the most gifted, the pursuit of understanding it to a level that is so finite, like the deepest levels of understanding, to pull the most out of your process, that drive to do that is extremely high. So I spent years and years and years just like perfecting that craft, and I'll always continue to perfect it because I'm always going to be a student of the game. Like I don't think there's ever a point that you're a master of it. And luckily, I'm at the point where the majority of my role is teaching others. So that's kind of how J3 University came about, is John and myself, just in our relentless pursuit of perfecting this process and getting the most out of every variable, knew that it was something that could change the coaching industry and improve it, right? So that's kind of where we've kind of developed J3 University and all the courses that have come along with that. And then now J3U Coaching is my coaching business that I built through No Switch Fitness, kind of merging into J3 University and becoming this amalgamation of all the work that I've done myself, all the work that John has done, and joining it all together and creating a team of people who are not only evidence-based with the courses and the research that they understand, but very application-based with the experience of myself and John and mentoring under us. And it's really cool because some of the team's already been mentoring under me for about 2 or 3 years. So extremely versed team, and it's just going to increase our impact and the amount of people that we can affect. And it's going to allow me to not only coach, but teach even further, which is where a lot of my passion is headed, is coaching high-level athletes and teaching high-level coaches.
No, cool. Yeah, awesome. So obviously the base of today is basically, I guess, discussing natural competitors who would potentially transition to the enhanced field, and a little bit around that and where that would be appropriate, where that would be inappropriate, because obviously you yourself coach both natural and enhanced competitors, as do I. And as we both know as well, it's not a decision which you push on someone. And not only that, sometimes it's not the best decision.
Yeah, it's not one to take lightly. So to kind of systematize it for the audience, there's kind of 3 main things that I go through with people. First is proof of concept. So competing naturally to show that you have potential in the sport, but also that you love the sport. And that proof of concept needs to be there before you go into enhanced bodybuilding. Probably about 3 years of pursuing that with everything that you've got in order to kind of fully say you've got that proof of concept. Understanding, and that comes from the coaches in. So educating the client on what does post bodybuilding life look like? What are the risks associated with that? What is it going to take to mitigate those risks so that they have the financial means to be able to mitigate those risks, and the understanding of how important that is from the get-go. That coincides with step 1 because a lot of the risk mitigation is executing at a high level, and that proof of concept develops the execution at the highest level. And so it creates an athlete that's going to execute at the highest level, whether there's drugs in play or not. And then the last one is just passion for the process, because it's hard to truly sacrifice what's needed to sacrifice to compete at the highest levels. And I don't think people understand that because of what's glorified through bodybuilding, and just the long-term journey of competing at the highest level and what you're going to sacrifice in order to do that, on multiple aspects, whether that's family life or involvement in activities, potential health detriment that you're going to have to manage. And I think that lack of understanding is not capable of being fully explained through the education piece.
Yeah.
I think you can educate someone through and through, but until they have to go through it themselves, it's a little bit hard to convey all the challenges that someone may run into. So it's important that you run through those 3 steps, because the passion for it is what will carry you through the times where you question it. But also point 1 and point 2, develop the capacity of the athlete and the understanding of the athlete where they'll actually have the highest glass ceiling and be able to get the most out of their career.
Yeah. And I do feel like as well, when it comes to the health the health metrics as well, that is somewhat understated online, because there's a whole play around the safer use. People consider that safe use, and you don't consider, I guess, the longer term repercussions that come with that. But as well, obviously, you've touched on when you look at financials, when you look at, I guess, longevity, even within relationships and stuff, that becomes a burden. And I'm sure you could agree.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why the last two you mentioned, the health and the family burden, is why I ended up stepping away.
Yeah.
Because my passion for the sport is always will be there. I just competitively have been doing it for like, I guess 11 years. Yeah, 10 years, 11 years. And I was still like barely going to be a national level athlete at that point at 260. I was having massive issues managing blood pressure, which we know long term can lead to cardiovascular detriment. And then you have a little baby girl, and it changes the way that you look at life, you know? So there was a family requirement that required me to step away. Also, from a business perspective, like I'm responsible for multiple people's incomes now. So like if I don't give that my all, it feels like I'm shorting them as well. So stepping away from bodybuilding was not only better for myself and my health, but it's better for everybody around me. So it's kind of like, you know, no other option really. I mean, it's just a simply selfish pursuit for me at that point.
Well, I get, yeah, it is obviously the mature decision, because we're roughly the same age as well. Different circumstances, because I'm years off a family. My partner's 22. I got
okay, so
yeah, I got a long
my
time.
wife is the same age as me, so
yeah. Nah, Izzy's still like, she's quite into bodybuilding, so she's pretty intent on taking it all the way. So we probably have like a good 6-7 years at least. Yeah, because she's the one that doesn't want kids, believe it or not. Yeah.
Which is actually a good point to bring up, because like, you know, one of the considerations of switching to compounds is fertility long term, and potentially having issues restoring that, right? Where one of the best suggestions the two best suggestions I have for natural athletes, and like pay attention, because like these would be the two recommendations I would have before stepping into it, would be get a baseline lab work so you understand like what your baseline labs look like. And then secondarily would be if kids in your future are something you want, like get sperm frozen if you're a male, because it's cheap to store. It's like 50-60 bucks a month. Like,
yeah. The only thing I think sperm, I'm pretty sure you only get about 10 years out of it.
Yeah. But let's be real, most people don't last in bodybuilding longer than 10 years.
Yeah, no, you're right, especially if you're at that kind of level. I'm assuming your conception though was while you were using.
Actually, I had we went through the IVF process, so we went through IVF.
Yeah.
So I pulled down all the way to like 100 milligrams a week. Went through the process of restoring fertility. My counts and motility are the two things with sperm that you're looking at. So my motility and counts were both low, to the point where natural conception wasn't impossible, but it wasn't likely. So at the time, I was still bodybuilding, and so we just thought it best to invest into the IVF process, because we didn't know. I mean, they were telling me it would take 12-15 months potentially before I would even be viable, right? And as a bodybuilder, when you're one track minded on progress, like it's hard to hear you're gonna have to step away for 15 months and then come back. So that's kind of what pushed us down the IVF process, because like my wife was fine. It was more me, just from the years of compound use. So it was, we were lucky. It worked the first try, and now we're blessed with a beautiful baby girl. But it's important, because I don't think what you don't realize when you're 22, 21, 23 is the struggle that your partner has to go through when you're going through that in order to have kids, if it's something you do to try to go down. And obviously your partner should love you for who you are and your pursuits, right? And so it's kind of taken with it, but understanding that it does make you a bit more aware of like how you communicate that to clients before they make the switch, of things that they could do to try to mitigate that for them.
It is, I find it very difficult to sort of have these conversations with younger guys, even mid to late 20s. You can still consider that young, because they don't actually consider that is a viable option, or that they think kids are so far along their pipeline. I have a couple of, I'll say probably friends rather than clients in particular, who have been using for a long time, no idea around fertility. And I know families are super important to them, but because they're under the impression that they can make it happen again, it's like, okay. You can't make, again, like we're going to get back to this as well. We're going to everything else, but I'm sure you can agree on this. Let's say you get a 22-year-old who really wants to give bodybuilding a good go down the, let's say IFBB route, hypothetically,
Yeah.
the enhanced route. The decisions that you make at 22 aren't going to be the same as, well, your priorities at 22 aren't going to be the same as priorities at 28.
Yeah, I would agree. This is where like the coach understanding the maturity of the athlete needs to step in.
I agree, because I look at myself and I think what I wanted at 22 is the same as what I want now, but I can't say that for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I guess that's me. That's the case of me in particular, right? So because I believe I was 21 when I started for the first time, somewhere around that age. And so I think I would still do it. Like I think I learned so much through that process that it taught me a lot of things, and bodybuilding brought me a lot. But yeah, I definitely didn't know, and it was not made known to me what I was actually getting into. So when you talk about switching from natural into that, the screening process, I prefer to start it like 3 to 5 months before the consideration of even plugging it in happens, because not only do you need to educate them, but they need contemplation time, right? So it's a two-way street when you're coaching. And so you need to give them what they need, but they also need to give you back, what you need to be able to coach them. And for some people that just takes time.
Of course. Yeah, so I was going to add to that as well. I've gone completely blank on what I was going to add to that. In that consideration for the naturals as well, one of the big things for me is, so just drawing back to the initial point as well, if you're a natural competitor and you do take that plunge into the open fields, you can't go back. And then you touched on, like, when you were 21, you jumped into it and then you didn't really know what you were getting yourself into. I feel like you will find yourself in a position where you're up against some guys or girls who, and then you are confronted with, all right, so this is what I actually need to do. And you might not, to be honest, man, it might not even be a case of like, I'm not comfortable doing this. It might be a case of, I can't afford to do this. It could be anything. It could be a case of, my partner's not comfortable with this, or I can't sustain this with my work or whatever. And that's where it becomes, you're then, this is the biggest thing when I have naturals that want to go from natural fez to enhanced, because you cannot go back. Well, you can, but you look like a piece of shit. So
yeah, I think the bigger piece to understand is just getting into bodybuilding over time. Even if you're competing naturally, right, you're going to see some down regulation over time, where you're pretty much potentially accepting, because not all natural athletes will need this. Some natural athletes at some point will probably need replacement therapy if chronic dieting becomes a part of their life for a long period of time, right? Outside slightly more resilient individuals. So I think just the whole journey of bodybuilding carries that. And then it's just, the risks are extremely magnified with, with enhancement, like going down the enhancement route, where at 22, like, it's hard to say that you have your ducks in a row in order to be able to do that and make that decision. And there's going to be people who disagree with me because they're like, this is the decision of the career path that I want to go down, right? And that's the hard case, because there is social proofing that happens within building a business within this industry. Like, you need to show social proofing of either your own process or other people's process that you coach. And the hard part about that is like, a lot of times when you're starting, your marketing and ability to retain clients or gain clients is off of showcasing your own process. So that's the argument that I have the hardest time combating, because it's not from like a selfish place of, vanity or anything like that. It's from like, this is what I want to do to make a living, and this is what I want to do for work. So it's like, it's harder. And so that's where the education piece, to me, plays a big role, because they're going to do it. It's just keeping them from doing it the wrong way.
of course. And I'm sure you'd be the same as me, but I have had situations where you run consults with people and you know well and truly that they should not be using anything from their education standpoint. But deep, this is the position that I've found myself in. You want to tell them, no, fuck off. But at the end of the day, regardless of what you say, they're going to go ahead and do it. And then it's like, you're in a position where it's like, do you try to help them with it? Or do you just tell them that this is not my place? It does depend on where you're at in your career too, because I don't deal with that much these days. These days it's more just like, go. But I've been in that position in the past 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I think a large part is how much they respect you and how you approach their process. Because coaching, as much as it visually seems like a top-down process, like coach tells client what to do, and that's just the end of the day, it's more of a two-way dynamic where respect has to be given both directions. Now, respect looks different in what that is, right? So from the coach to client, it's communicating what you're doing, why you're doing it, timely responses on check-ins the majority of the time. But on the client's end, it's not only respecting the time of the coach, but it's doing things like checking in on time, communicating clearly on the check-in, adhering to the plans. And to your point, like the adherence to the plans portion is where people will go rogue and make decisions on their own. And then you're like trying to offer help to this kid that's making the decision down the enhancement route, but they're not even listening to you. And that's when it gets tough, because there's a lack of respect there. And unless you develop that athlete into garnering more respect, it's going to be an uphill battle, and you're going to be fighting it the whole way.
I do feel as though you would notice this in clients, once that respect is broken down, it's very, very hard to get back to where it was.
Yeah, it's a value thing, right? Because it makes you, and we all have our hourly rates, right? And so and that's where I try to conceptualize this, is we all work for an hourly rate per hour that's different for everybody. But not only are you not valuing that coach's time by not doing the things you're supposed to do from a financial standpoint, but like for someone who now has a family, that's time spent that I could be doing something with the family, or I could be buying back my time by doing something else. And that's where the respect, the further you get along and the more that you have as far as spinning plates as a coach, it becomes more of an issue, and you have to be less tolerant of it.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to jump just into the health and safety stuff, because the first point was sort of understanding the decision. I think we got a good cover of that, actually. Probably a little bit even better than I expected. Health and safety, we already touched on the fertility risks. To my understanding, fertility in most cases is like replenishable. I can't think of a better word than that.
Yeah, no, that's a good way.
Yeah, it was more the issue I more saw with fertility. This is in my research. You tell me your understanding. The issue I saw more with getting the fertility back online was the time it would take away from potential TRT. So in a point where a male would have to sit hypergonadal for like 12 to 18 months. And most people aren't going to do that.
Yeah, it's like a quality of life thing, right? That's
Yeah.
it's hard, because you'll see people go into depression, and then like things around them start to slide, like work slides and family life slides. And so that's where it's harder, more than actually like bringing fertility back, is the quality of life. And that time duration is the biggest key. Because it's not something where you start your fertility process and a month later you've got your sperm back, right? Like there's life cycles to these sperm, somewhere in that like 70 to 95, 100 day mark, where they've got to go through these life cycles, variable person to person. But you're going to have to restore that through that life cycle. So I mean, you're looking at minimum 3 months for most people. Some will do it quicker. More resilient athletes will do it quicker, but that's few and far between. So the time portion is the biggest. From a health perspective, fertility is probably the lowest one on the totem pole, though, in regards to enhancement. Because when you go into PEDs, like the realms that you're looking at are going to be like brain/neurological health. You're looking at kidney health, you're looking at liver health, and then cardiovascular health as well. And so like those are the 4 primary ones you're probably considering from a health perspective with PED use.
Yeah, I do. Neurologically, I do notice. Obviously, that's one of the less understood areas. But the more you think about it, the more you understand, I guess, the drugs, the more you can actually, in my view, the more you can actually see that reflect in people's tendencies over time. I've got a few close friends who have abused for like close to a decade, and I can see the fact that they've changed from one person to another. And obviously anyone's going to change in the 12 in a 10-year window, but that is very reflective of what you would expect from, I guess, an overexcited brain, to put it simply.
Yeah, so I would more kind of argue that, like, because we have evidence of neuronal death with certain compounds, right? And nandrolone is typically the one that's brought up from a neuronal death standpoint. And then the thing about athletes that are polyform in nature is that they have a predisposition to drug use that's outside the realms of PEDs. And so you get recreational drug use that compounds on the PEDs. And one of the papers that we have in J3 University on the courses shows a comparison of nandrolone and weed and the neuronal death between the two of them. And so, like, you're combining two things that could potentially lead to neuronal decline, or neurological decline, I should say. And so you're just like seeing compounded effects. And then also, where it's probably the worst anecdotally that I notice is females that are pursuing the higher muscularity classes, because the reality of those classes in the pro leagues is that they're approaching transition therapy from a drug use perspective. And so that doesn't lend itself to a psychologically stable environment. Bodybuilding itself doesn't, and just the type of person that it attracts. And so there's a lot of self-awareness that I think is needed to pursue this at the highest level, because you can kind of get lost in it if you're not careful.
Of course. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that as well, with the attraction of the person, because 9 in 10 are definitely of that kind of description, without getting into it.
Right? Like it's hard to do, requires a lot of structure. People get a lot of satisfaction out of, and self-worth out of executing on that. And that's where it's like, when you talk the health piece, the quality of life piece is another piece you have to talk about with it. And that's why I even bring it up, is because, like, some people's quality of life without bodybuilding is really, really poor. So it's more like risk mitigation rather than risk removal. And like any PED use is always risk mitigation, never risk removal. But you're just accepting that there's potentially going to be decline in these 4 areas. You just need to monitor it and go about it the best way you can, and keep your quality of life where you would like it to be.
In your personal experience and in your, I guess, client management, amongst like kidney, heart, cardiac, is there something that you see come to the forefront as opposed to the others, or is it pretty widespread? Well,
issues coming to me from other coaches, I see a lot of like elevated liver enzymes just from excessive oral use and things along those lines, that typically associated with like kidney function. But I think the one that I see the most is cardiovascular health detriment. So chronically high blood pressures leading to issues with kidneys, or chronically high blood pressures leading to issues with left ventricular hypertrophy, or ejection fraction out of the heart, or long-term detriment from like a cardiovascular health perspective. And so like it's become pretty well known, like the heart attacks and things that bodybuilders have suffered from. What you don't see a lot of times is a lot of these bodybuilders are going into AFib, right? And so getting like AFib type events and not really reporting it, and it's just kind of moving on. There's a lot in the industry that have gone through that. So cardiovascular is definitely the one that I see the most, which is where the majority of our mitigation or risk mitigation is around cardiovascular. So echocardiograms yearly when you're going into PED use, we're using some sort of angiotensin mediator in order to manage not only blood pressure, but angiotensin's influence on cardiovascular metrics, because there's evidence for angiotensin elevation without blood pressure elevation leading to cardiovascular detriment. So we're actually looking at potentially not even having high blood pressure and just having elevation in this angiotensin, potentially contributing to cardiovascular disease long term. And so you need to manage that. And so that's where cardiovascular is probably the one that I see the most. And then you combine that with the state that most bodybuilders are in at peak off season, which is pre-diabetic in a lot of cases. You're like looking at insulin resistance potentially driving further cardiovascular issues, which you can then just go look at type 2 diabetes research and find all the lists of cross-reference of like cardiovascular and kidney issues you get in that population. It's not as drastic as a type 2 diabetic, but it's still similar in presentation.
Okay. So you've got a natural bodybuilder who's looking to make that transition. Are they likely to have to push themselves to these kind of limits?
Not everyone. What do you want out of bodybuilding is a better question, right?
Say it again,
Like,
sorry.
what do you want out of bodybuilding is a better question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because not everybody wants to compete at the highest level. They just want to be the best version of themselves within their risk profile.
Yeah.
So like for the people with lower to medium risk, like it's certainly a pursuit that you can do in a very healthy manner that mitigates risks, and you can see the best version of yourself on stage. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that is a great way to go about this process. Mm-hmm. The reality that I try to communicate is that if you want to compete at the highest level, you are going to make sacrifices from a health perspective in order to pursue that. Outside of the genetic elite, like there's people up there that are competing at the highest level with very minimal drug use, and you cannot compare yourself to those people unless you are that level of genetic elite. So it shouldn't be used as an excuse. It's just, what do you want out of life type of a question. So yeah, I mean, no matter who you are stepping into enhancement, there should be risk mitigation strategies with health checks and how you go about it and things like that. But the level at which you pursue this and the expectation management around where you're going to land as a career in bodybuilding should be built around the risk model you're willing to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think one of our first conversations as well was we sort of identified which risk category I wanted to fall into. Yeah, I quite liked that.
Yeah, and I conceptually break it into levels. It just helps me like with communicating it to clients, and so kind of categorize these people into levels and keep yourself within that level of usage, and don't ever take a client. And because coaches listening to this, like the reality of coaching is you're probably coaching 100 clients, maybe 80, 50, something along those lines, right? Creating systems that allow you to keep people straight within where they want their risks allows you to be a better coach. And so that's where a lot of these things that we teach through J3 University, conceptual models in order to make that easier for coaches, a lot of that comes from us managing client loads and being coaches ourselves, right? So
yeah, I'm quite interested actually that you didn't really speak much of the kidneys, because I feel like that's one of the concepts which are probably most overlooked.
Yeah, I think a lot of kidney issues there's multiple inputs, but potentially excessive diuretic usage might be where you're seeing a lot of that. And luckily, a lot of people are catching on to the fact that if you get into contest shape, you probably don't need a diuretic to actually nail the peak, right? So, and that's one thing people have drawn from the natural realm that's really good is people keep asking the question, like, why are these people so effing shredded on a natural stage, right? And or natural stage. And why are you not seeing it elsewhere in excessive diuretic uses where you see that? I mean, I've seen 14-day diuretic protocols.
Really?
Come across my table. Yeah. So, okay. Which is fascinating to me to start diuretics 14 days out. But
yeah, I didn't really think people use diuretics at all anymore. When you hear someone using a diuretic, usually you know that they're a few years behind the pack.
I wouldn't say that, because there is use cases for it. It's typically fixing an issue.
Yeah.
There's few use cases for it. So like it's all needs based, right? So
you probably need to reframe that as when it's used as a blanket.
Yeah.
I know coaches that are just like, that's a better diuretic. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Because to be fair with you, even then I've had diuretics on hand at client shows, or like in the lead up to a client show, thinking if I need this, it's here. Fairness, I've never used it, but yeah,
it's definitely not off the table.
Yeah,
but it's rarely actually used or presented to a client as an option. So I think if you do your job, set up the peak well and manage it well, that's not going to be needed for most. Where I've had to use it in the past is client lack of adherence.
Yeah. Is that a lack of it in the peak protocol? You wouldn't think you'd get that, would you?
Oh, dude, this year has been the biggest eye opener that people don't care.
Yeah.
at that point, like some people just aren't built for this, and getting in true contest shape is not easy.
Yeah.
To the point that when you're there, you don't always logically think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had people screw up during peak week or quit during peak week because
during peak week.
just because they're not thinking logically, or they may not agree with what I said, even though like they don't see the 3-day, 4-day process. That's not kind of where. So it's hard because you're dealing with a very sensitive athlete in that last stages. And it's funny, like I had to turn my phone off of do not disturb because I've got 3 athletes competing at nationals this week, and so like I'm like making sure that they're okay. But it's a tough dynamic, and increased communication helps. But to bring it back to diuretic usage, like it's typically just done in situations where travel causes water retention, or a client accidentally eats excess food, or you accidentally load someone excessively and you need to fix that in a short amount of time, right? And so it's typically mistakes that you're using it for.
Do you see acute risks there from a health perspective?
Acute risk comes with amount of usage. So like higher levels of diuretic usage creates a larger rebound environment on the back end of the show period. That's more where the acute risk is like dehydration into binging post show, getting large influx of like sodium and nutrients without rehydration status and that kind of thing. That's where you'll see large jumps in blood pressure causing cardiovascular events typically.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because I was going to say I've seen some pretty rough stories with that one as well. Yeah, like I'm talking like legs like balloons.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So I'm assuming as well, if you were transitioning a client from a natural to an enhanced kind of situation, you would provide them with a resource to do their own education as well.
So that's J3 University kind of steps in, right? Is I do a Zoom call typically to go over it with them, but I'm like, hey, like during your contemplation time, like probably worth you going through this course and learning more yourself, because a more knowledgeable athlete will always be a better athlete.
Yeah. For myself personally, I typically put them through a range of different resources to sort of have an understanding themselves. And I sort of want them at a point where it's like, if I dropped off the face of the earth tomorrow, you don't have to scramble for another coach to tell you what to do. Like you can take the reins and have some idea. The most important thing is, like you said, back to the start, the only thing that I really worry about in my practice is like, it's not so much the upcoming use, it's more the years beyond use, as we spoke about. Like, do they understand what it looks like later? Because even something, we could go super shallow as well here. If they could be an individual who really loves training, and they could use and then realize it's not for them, or they're not comfortable with the risks that they're wearing, or they could have something pop up which makes it a problem. And I have seen that kill passion for training when they do discontinue, because they realize they can't progress at that. Well, they sort of forget what it's like to progress as a natural, because they've compared it now to the dark side, and then that dark side's too good, but they can't go back for whatever reason, whether that be I've had situations in which like clients just don't respond well to compounds, or they get hair shedding, or like little things like that, or family obligations, and then they just decide, nah, don't like this, and then you see them slowly afterwards, like it's just not the same for them anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably not too far from that. Like I mentioned at the beginning of
You'd be
the
an extreme
call,
example. Yeah.
training's different now, man. Like it's still important to me and I love it, but it's not the same. It's just it's never will be. It's just like I cannot keep up performance wise, but my body does not like being above 230. Like it's just, it can't happen. So it does happen. It's an unfortunate part of what we do, but a lot of people end up training. It just looks a lot different.
I find a lot of people get into different forms of training as well at that point. Yeah, just something that gives them that different kind of kick.
Yeah.
Athletic
endeavors a lot of times is what ends up happening.
Yeah, because I did TRT. I'm still technically on TRT, but I did about 8 months this year. It was hard. It is hard to keep excited. Yeah.
I think that's where you spend so much time as a bodybuilder, like very few and far between keep functional capacity within the bodybuilding realm. I mean, there's some who do, certainly, but and they go through that process of like, starting and stopping, and then they're not doing it anymore. And so like the desire now is to be able to do things again. So that's where you see like transition in the passion. But yeah, look, I think the reality is it's the client's decision. Okay. As a coach, your role is to educate them. And so, as bad as it's going to sound, what happens afterwards is kind of on them. Like once they're done coaching with you and you've put them in a place where you've mitigated the risk, their health metrics are in a good spot, or in at least a decent spot relative to their risk profile. And you've sent them on their way and they're done with bodybuilding or they're done coaching with you. Like you can't hang on to that, because those decisions that are made afterwards are the clients. Just like starting PDs is a client's decision. The education process we just walked through should foster the client in making a decision for themselves, never you making that decision for them.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to look at it too, because I think a lot of coaches that I know in particular do have a little bit of anxiety around that as well. Yeah, and it is a little bit of a personal responsibility that you have to, well, again, depends how you want to look at it. Would you say there's an adaptation to training when you do make the jump as well in regards to the approach there? Or probably a better question, would there be a significant variation in the way that we train when we do make that transition?
Not the way you train, the clip at which you train is what changes. So performance can take some really large jumps really quickly, where you've got to really be careful with volume.
Yep.
Just because you're getting so much more out of each set. Like your workload per set is like sets, reps times weight times sets is so much higher. And so that's where like the case of, and I was telling you about this off camera, the natural athlete who preps, immediately starts TRT post show and then goes into their escalation during the post show phase is a perfect environment for helping them recover from the prep first before they go into the off season phase and going into the off season phase and being productive. But it's also the perfect environment for tearing a quad or driving fatigue up or things like that, where the quality of the volume is now so high because the performance is so high relative to their natural baseline that you have to have a disciplined athlete on progressions to know that it's better to not take a load progression and miss your rep category by 3 or 4 reps over the rep range than it is to load a bar with 10 to 15 extra pounds and end up with an injury or do 2 reps less than the rep range.
Something you observe as well. Have you seen injuries like this before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing with the guy that I have that did the natural show and it's transitioning is he's been really disciplined about his progressions, but he's multiple times reported like let's say week 4 it was an 8 to 12 set of squats and he did 10 reps. He's like, man, I'm coming back the next week with the same rep pace and hitting 14. And he's like, this doesn't make sense on paper. Like, it's not going to make sense on paper for a bit. Like, just be disciplined. And he's really good about that. And so he doesn't I use a +2 rule. So like once you get +2 over the rep range, like if it's 10 to 12, it's 14, then you take a load progression that should be back down. And so that's a good way to manage it as far as like keeping yourself out of injury. And then videoing yourself and making sure week 1 reps look like week 15 reps.
Of course. And as well with that client that you mentioned, the natural to enhance, because obviously I don't follow him, but I think he's popped up a few times. He's quite ambitious in regards to the way he wants to go about open bodybuilding, isn't he?
Yeah, I'll give him a shout out. It's Form Over Ego on Instagram. There's like some underscore thingies in there, but Mitchell Camerano. I hope I said that right, Mitchell.
Yeah.
But he's one of the most passionate people about bodybuilding I've ever seen. And that's what makes it enjoyable to work with, because like I say jump, he says how high. But he's very inquisitive and he learns a lot. And so he presents a lot of good ideas on the table. And so it's been one of the best client experiences I've ever had. So it's really cool to work with someone like that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, because again, the reason I did bring that up as well is because I feel like that's someone who's making the transition for the right reasons, rather
Yeah,
and at the
he
right time as well.
he's been doing it for 10 years naturally, 11 years,
Yeah.
something like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and obviously we've got the improved recovery capacity and whatnot as well. Do you actually find that you notice a variation in someone's ability to input food on like a top end level and a bottom end level, top end being high ends of a surplus, bottom end being low ends of a deficit by introducing androgens?
Like it changes those peak points and low points. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying?
Yeah.
Um,
Or anecdotally.
Low points from a prep perspective, not really.
Mm.
Peak points in an off season, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just you have more runway in the
Yeah.
off season because you're not accumulating body fat at the same rate.
Mm. Yeah, of course.
From a dieting perspective, I wouldn't say that I notice higher set points as far as like the bottom caloric intake.
Mm.
Maybe potentially you could argue they spend less time there, which in theory across the entirety of the prep would be more total caloric intake, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But no, I don't really. Preps are so weird too. Like preps are very dependent upon the start point. So like it's hard to compare like a natural athlete with a start point that's 30 pounds above where they're going to step on stage versus an enhanced athlete that's 30 pounds above where they're going to step on stage. Because there's so many tools in the toolbox for a prep like that you can probably get them there a bit quicker, or you can run a slower rate of loss and know that you're still going to get there. Or it might take less time. Like that the time piece is probably the one that I see the most. Like preps, 30 pounds above a stage weight, let's say, it might take 22 weeks, 24 weeks for an enhanced athlete. It might take 34 for a natural athlete. And that's probably the biggest difference I've noticed from a prep perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so you're talking for natural athletes, you go that long with preps as well?
If they're that, I mean, ideally, I don't have them 30 pounds above where they're going to step on stage, but if they are, then yeah. I mean, Mitch, for his last prep, which was natural, I think he went 31, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go look at his folder, but something along those lines.
Interesting. Yeah, no, just curious to know. Yeah, there's a big difference between the natural and because a lot of people do play off preps, shape up preps with reference of like what they will hear on the internet, and a lot of that is in the context of enhanced bodybuilding, where you hear like 12-week preps, 16-week preps. As a natural, that's not possible because even when I do 25, I do 25s for the most part, and a lot of people do say, "Why the hell are you doing 25s?" And I think it's safe. If anything, it should be a little bit longer. And the only reason it's 25 for me is because it's 25 to the first show of the season.
Yeah. I build it off where the athlete's at. So however many weeks of guiding I need with 4 weeks of wiggle room. That's
yeah. Now 25 for me will be a rule of thumb, would be between 20 and 28. Yeah. Anyway. No, cool. So we've covered a fair bit there, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. Probably one last one there is managing good health and strategies to do so while you're on. Obviously, we touched on blood work, we touched on ECGs. Obviously, we haven't really touched too much on the supplementation and whatnot, but what are a few strategies that you would give that would be, I guess,
beneficial?
Yeah.
Supplement side, there's a decent list that you can use. I think you're chasing like 0.5% here, but there is some efficacy. So my list would typically include high levels of fish oil use, citrus bergamot, TUDCA, N-acetylcysteine, ubiquinol, making sure that it's not CoQ10 or ubiquinone, making sure it's ubiquinol.
Do you feel like there's a significant difference there?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I use ubiquinol. Yeah.
Grapeseed extract, and those are typically the mainstays from a health supplementation standpoint. Oh, vitamin D as well, and K2, vitamin D, K2. That's supplementally what I would use. I more focus a lot, just because impact wise, I notice it's a much bigger difference on the day-to-day execution of steps in cardiovascular activity, blood pressure medication where it's needed for angiotensin mediation. That's where I spend a lot more of my time with an athlete, is making sure they execute on that front.
Just a question for you as well, and I've had this discussion with a mate of mine, Rick, about this. Do you notice, well, maybe more so in early days, obviously you've got a higher caliber of athlete now than what you probably did 2 years ago. When you put the ARBs on the table, do you notice a degree of resistance in the athlete?
Rightfully so, though. I mean, this is all medication comes with side effects, and for people who have tried tomasartan and seen some of the GI upset or issues with gut, like, they're gonna reverberate what I'm about to say. But using polypharm shouldn't be taken lightly, and this opinion largely comes from being married to a medical practitioner.
Yeah.
Yet in bodybuilding, because it's so normalized, it's just like, just add another drug at it and manage it, right? So for me, it's not like, I never take the resistance as a negative thing. I just appreciate that they're critically thinking for themselves. I think more it's just, we're at a point now where we have evidence that shows angiotensin elevation could potentially be detrimental from a cardiovascular health perspective. So you probably should be managing that through angiotensin mediation, whether that's ACE inhibitor like lisinopril or something like that, or an ARB like tomasartan, something. Tomasartan is popularized in our industry, but
yeah,
it's not.
You were one of the first coaches I dealt with who didn't see it as prescription, as in not a genuine prescription, as in like who wasn't, you just take it no matter what.
Yeah. I think
I've always been like that as well. And when I've sort of pitched that to people, they jump down my throat, and it's like, oh, I'm just going to throw something in there for the fuck of it.
Yeah, it just,
even its availability of it.
Patience and explanation goes a long ways.
Yeah,
in the coaching.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to source things like that in Australia, though. That makes it more. Yeah.
Yeah, I coach a lot of Australian athletes, I know.
It used to be super easy. They changed the laws.
Yeah, I know that y'all have had some recent like over-the-counter supplementation laws that have been a little bit more stringent now, because I know some supplements like I think Tudka and Ubiquinol and NAC are now hard
to buy them from iHerb, or like, because we're affiliated with a company called Foundry who stock like the supplement needs line, and they can't sell like 80% of the supplement needs products anymore because of the laws. But the law that actually blocked talmasartan was okay, cool, that's fine. The talmasartan laws, that was based on doing private consulting with doctors. You can't do that anymore. Yeah, something weird like that. Anyway, man, we can wrap up there. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Of course, I am always happy to come on. I appreciate you guys having me. It's always good to have a good conversation to start my day and end your day.
End my day.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, awesome, man. Well, hopefully that's helpful for people as well. That should be great. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.